YouTube, hello, welcome. Hope you are having a fantastic day. It is June 14th, Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and today we are going to be talking about Thermopylae, the Battle of Thermopylae in the Greco-Persian Wars. As well, today we are also going to be celebrating hitting affiliate status here on Twitch. So if you do enjoy this type of content, learning about history, mythology, and playing through some of your favorite games that feature some historical characters or even mythological characters, do be sure to give a like on the video, comment on your favorite game, favorite mythological character, and follow us here over at twitch.tv/mythology and gaming, and subscribe to the YouTube channels, both our deep dive channel and our VOD channel. So, first and foremost, to understand the Battle of Thermopylae, we need to understand everything else around it. So, the battle itself took place around 480 BCE, and it took part in what we now know as the Greco-Persian Wars. So, these wars took place in the early parts of the 4th century BCE. So, as you can see from the screen, we have 499 to 449 BCE. The vast majority of the fighting itself took place between 490 and 480 BCE. There are a couple battles, the Battle of Artemisium, the Battle of Salamis, Battle of Marathon, and the Battle of Thermopylae. All of these battles, these skirmishes, were extremely important to the wars to the war themselves. And of course, all of this started when Darius I, who was the emperor, the king, the leader of the Persian Empire, or what's known as the Achaemenid Empire. Am I saying that? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah, Achaemenid Empire. And the reason for all of these battles, all of these wars, this time of death, essentially, because there's a lot of death that happens in this period, is because Persia was expanding. It was one of the biggest empires to exist at the time. Ad was about to start, and I'm like, I'm only like 9 minutes in. It was one of the biggest empires of the time, and as it was expanding, it went into more and more territory that a lot of people did not want to be grabbed by the Persian Empire, mainly the Greek Empire. The Greek city-states, including Athens, Corinthia, Ionia, and Sparta, especially. So, before we go into the battle themselves and to understand the war itself, we need to understand who was fighting on what side. So, the Greeks and the Persians. We first need to understand who were the Persians. Persia existed primarily around the Iranian country. So it was a country that existed primarily within what we now call Iran. It included parts of Babylon, Mesopotamia. It expanded. It's at the time of the Achaemenid Empire between 522 and 486 BCE. It expanded and existed, or its territory stretched from Pakistan all the way on the western side of India, all the way over into western Libya, which is just by Egypt. And that is a huge amount of Indo-European land that Persia existed on, thrived on, and controlled. Now, the interesting part about the Persian Empire was that they were multi-cultured, meaning that they brought in different cultures that they conquered and integrated them into their own existence. It wasn't, hey, I conquered you, now you have to follow our gods, our laws, our standards, our traditions. No, instead, Persia conquered a people. So especially when they conquered Egypt. When they conquered Egypt, they included the Egyptians into their systems. They would build roads for the Egyptians from the capital of Persia all the way down to Memphis. They would include worship for the Egyptian gods within the Persian Empire. They would do everything in their power, the Persians, I mean, they would do everything in their power to include as much of the traditions, the people, the aspects of life of the people that they conquered into their empire. So it was an extremely progressive type of leadership that they had. It wasn't solely based on fear or aggression. It was acceptance, more or less. And so in our modern day, when we look at the Greco-Persian War, we look at how the Greeks perceive and how the Western world perceives the attack by the Persians. We see them as, like, especially with the movie 300, we see them as otherworldly, exotic, not grounded in reality, when really it was one of the most accepting empires to ever exist. The only thing that they asked was that they followed, the people who they conquered followed their standard laws. Hey, don't attack the guards. Hey, if we need you to do something, please do it. It was very accepting. So when they moved into, and of course an ad is about to start over on Twitch, so I'm going to try to wrap up this part here, and then I will pause for a second. So when they moved into Greece, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to integrate the Greek lifestyle, the traditions, the worship, the people into the Persian Empire. And what's really interesting, the thing I find interesting, is that they followed a Zoroastrianism, which was a monotheistic belief, which was really unheard of at the time. I mean, the only thing that was close to it, and close by a far standard, were the Semites. But to continue on with the Persians, after Darius I, after his death in 486, his son Xerxes I took over, and Xerxes was a very powerful leader. He used everything that he learned from his father Darius, who had learned everything from his father Cyrus the Great, or grandfather, father, and tried even more so to expand the Persian Empire from what his father had started. So let's continue on. So we've learned about the Persians. Now let's learn about the Greeks. So I have it here. Who were the Greeks? Who were the Spartans? Primarily, we view the western side of this battle as the Spartan front. We see it as it was 300 Spartans who fought against an empire of thousands, when in reality, it was not just the Spartans. The Spartans were there. There were about 1,000 of them. But by the time of the fighting, or the primary fighting itself, it was around 300 Spartans that were left. Sparta, alongside the other Greek city-states of Athens, Corinthia, the Ionia islands, they followed what was known as a Hellenic polytheistic religion, or traditional belief, that primarily, it's one of the most well-known cults of worship in the entire world. So Hercules, or Heracles, I should say, Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, all those gods that we all know about pretty well. But the interesting thing with the Greeks, especially the Spartans and Athenians, is that they were multifaceted. Each city-state had their own laws, had their own traditions, had their own beliefs. And in this Greco-Persian War, they all banded together and said, hey, we each follow our own laws, but at this point in time, we are a singular people. Now, of course, this would dissolve later on, many years down the line when we get to the Peloponnesian Wars, but that's for a different video. The primary ones that we look at right now, in considering the Greco-Persian War, and especially the Battle of Thermopylae, is that the Spartans, their laws prevented them from running away from battle, or retreating, or leaving the battle site, unless they were literally unable to battle. That was the only time that they could. And this entire front to dissuade or push back the Persians from entering into the Greek, or to the Peloponnese, and truly taking over the entire Greek world. This was led by Leonidas the First. Leonidas, whichever you want to say is correct. He was one of the kings of Sparta. Now, I could go into Spartan history, Spartan life, and traditions, but I think that would take away from a lot of what the battle really was. So, in the battle itself, it was Spartans, Thracians, Thespians, Corinthians, Athenians, all of them together. And as we look at the battle itself, we also need to understand how this all started. What was the thing that really brought all of this together? Of course, we had mentioned before that Darius the First was the one, was the Persian emperor who really wanted to expand the Persian Empire. So he moved his forces further west and conquered Ionia, he conquered Thrace, he conquered Macedonia. All of these were huge because they were the pathways into the Peloponnese, the pathways into Athens and Sparta, into the Attic people and the Doric people. Now, of course, the Greeks didn't like this because they don't like to be conquered. They like to do the conquering themselves. So, in 499, between 499 and 494 BCE, we had the Ionian revolts. Now, these revolts were small skirmishes between hoplites, Greek citizens, and against not the immortals of the Persian Empire, but through the standard guard and standard soldiers. Persia had a very big army. They had an armada that they could move, and this consisted of around like 300,000 soldiers that they could move. Now, you'll see at the very bottom here, I have it in quotations, earth and water in 491 BCE. So, you might be wondering what that is. Well, if you've seen 300, you probably recognize that by the messenger saying, what do the Persians offer? They offer earth and water. It's believed that earth and water meant we want to come in and rule over the Peloponnese. By doing that, we offer the power of the earth, our soldiers, our cavalry, our archers, our materials of the earth, and our water, our sea power, our the vast armada of ships that we have. By bringing in the Greeks, our Persian Empire can control both earth and water. Now, how did the Greeks react to this? Well, in all honesty, the 300 movie actually pulls from this really, actually kind of well. Pun intended, actually. I didn't even mean that. So when the Persian messenger comes with earth and water to the Greek city-states, and they did this for Athens and Sparta especially, since they were the two primary powers, or the primary city-states within the Peloponnese, the Athenians went and beheaded the messengers. And typically it was 2 messengers each time. And then the Spartans took the messengers and dropped them down a well, where they more than likely died from starvation or, either suffocating or whatnot. So when you see Leonidas in 300 kick the messenger down a gigantic hole, that's based on fact. Of course, killing a messenger is extremely taboo. It is frowned upon in every single society. But that's how pissed off the Greeks were against the Persian Empire coming onto their land and conquering the Ionian area, and then offering the rest of Greece peace. Because the Greeks at that point were like, no, we're at war with you now. So this led eventually to the Battle of Marathon. Now, we all know the famous story of how I spelled marathon wrong on that. Oh well. We all know the story of how marathons got started. And if you don't, well, it's because of the Greco-Persian War. When Persia attacked, or when Persia had taken over Ionia, Thrace, and Macedonia, the Greeks revolted. And in that revolt, there was the Battle of Marathon, which pushed back Darius's forces back into Persian-controlled land. And there was technically... Excuse me, goodness. Let me get some water. Now, for the Persians themselves, or no, not the Persians, I apologize. For the Greeks, they had runners, they had messengers that were supposed to go back and forth between different areas of the battlefield to inform everybody of what everybody else was doing. One of those messengers, Phidippides, I believe is how you pronounce that, is one such messenger who ran from... Oh, where did he run from? I think it's Athens? No. Unfortunately, I can't remember. I didn't write it down. It's the one thing I didn't write down. He went into the city-states to tell them of the Battle of Marathon. Ran there, saw the battle, saw the victory that the Greeks had over the Persians in pushing back their forces on Marathon, and then ran back to the city-states to tell them that we are pushing back. The Persians have retreated. We have a victory at Marathon. And at that point, Phidippides says his words and dies on the spot from exhaustion. So, from that moment on, the marathon race existed. Now, in this battle, 90% of the Persians that fought died. Now, when I say 90%, I mean of a force of 10,000, 9,000 died. And of the Greeks, only about 100, 200 died. So it is a decisive victory for Greece. And of course, this happens around 491, and it wouldn't be until 480, 10 years later, that Xerxes, after his father, would continue in the assault on Greece. And this leads to our legendary battle, the Battle of Thermopylae, our topic for today. I know it took a minute to get here, but we need to understand where we came from to get to where we are. Now, it's stated by authors like Herodotus, Diodorus, of that time period, that the Battle of Thermopylae took place sometime in August, late August, maybe early September, we're not 100% sure, of 480 BCE, and it lasted around 7 days. Now, they didn't do fighting for 7 straight days. The first day, the Persians came into the area. The Greeks had already learned about the Persian force coming into the Greek area of Thermopylae as they had moved their armada around. And in that first day, Xerxes saw all of the Greeks and didn't want to fight outright. Instead, he tried to reason with them, which is incredible to do, especially in this time, or just incredible to do in any sort of time. So he sends messengers, and when he sends the messengers, he finds, and one of the greatest stories ever, the messenger for Xerxes finds the Spartans, who were at the front, of course, because they were very much a militarized people. They saw them doing calisthenics, which was very weird to the Persians, because they were like, what are these people doing? They're practically naked, running around and exercising when we're about to fight them and kill them. And it was with these messengers saying, you are completely outnumbered. Drop down your weapons, surrender to King Xerxes, to the Persian Empire, and become one with us. Join us. Become part of the Persian Empire. And this is where the famous line by literally Leonidas himself saying, come and take them. Or he said, come take them, to the messenger. Which, if that's not badass, I don't know what is. Dude's just naked, running around, exercising, when the Persians were like, we have so many soldiers, we could kill you now. Drop your weapons, and you don't have to die. And he's like, no. Kill me first. You can grab him from my cold, dead body. Now, unfortunately, what the Greeks weren't fully aware of at the time was how large the force that Xerxes had brought to Thermopylae. Because in gathering the soldiers, as Themistocles was to do, Themistocles, by the way, was a Athenian general and politician who, of learning about the armada that Xerxes was bringing to the Peloponnese, he gathered up all of the Greeks together to join forces and stand at Thermopylae. And unfortunately, what they didn't realize is that the Persian armada stood at around 200,000 at that point in time, that was standing on the other end of Thermopylae. And for the Greeks themselves, they stood at around 7,000 to 9,000, which, that's a lot. That is almost 20 to 1 in comparison. Now, however, the Greeks, especially as recorded by Diodorus and Herodotus, the Greeks were very much, they were a lot more equipped for war than the Persians were. Persians were as well. They fought a lot harder because their training allowed them to learn the field of battle way better than anyone else. Plus, this was their home field. They knew the land so much better. And especially with the land, Thermopylae was a huge causeway. The picture that you see here right below my notes, this is a modern day, or this is what Thermopylae looks like modern day. Now, on this right-hand side, let me see, can you see my cursor? Yes, okay. So, over here, where my cursor is, this would have been filled with water, because this was a gulf. So it was this path. Literally, this little path right here was what 200,000 Persians had to walk through. So of course, this was the best place to hold the forces, and especially with the fact that the Greeks had to hold the forces here on top of the battle at Artemisium, which was more so a sea battle. The Greeks had to win both to be able to win this fight against the Persian Armada. So, with the battle starting, or with the entire engagement starting on that first day, instead of battling the very next day, after being told, come and take our weapons, Xerxes holds back. Xerxes stands by and waits. He watches. He sees what the Greeks are doing and prepares his troops, gathers them all up as they come into the far northern side of Thermopylae. And the fighting wouldn't start until the the fourth day? No, the fifth day of the entire engagement, which leads to day 1 of fighting. Now, of course, we got an ad going for Twitch, so we're going to hold off for just a moment. But again, YouTube, if you do enjoy this, please do not hesitate to comment on what your favorite war movie is, or what your favorite character is, as I really love to hear what people like about this, or if there's something that you know that I might not have known of, or that I might not have known about when considering this battle. So, excuse me, goodness. But on this 5th day, which was the first day of true battle, the Greeks would face off against thousands of Persians. Now, again, these weren't the immortals yet. These were the standard soldiers that the Persian Empire had gathered from all of the conquered regions, all the conquered areas. So to come across, or to come against 10,000 Persian soldiers, the Greeks had to be extremely well prepared for this fight. So what they did is they set up what's known as a phalanx. Phalanx being multiple shields interlocking together to create one singular wall. So that it's not just one person behind a shield, it is multiple people behind a shield wall. And this is extremely effective. So now, before we get into this, let's look at what the fighting might have been like, or the setup might have been like in a Greek setting. So we're going to hold off right here, pause for a moment, turn off that, and here we go. All right, so let's watch this opening moment from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the depictions here. But from here, we can see a pretty well described depiction of the Greek battle, but as well, kind of our modern interpretation of this. So, And of course, hopefully the audio is not too quiet.
Tell me, Venekis, have you ever gone fishing with your son?
Now, there's something here I want to correct.
No, never. A soldier's life is all I've had the honor to know.
So, when he says a soldier's life is all I've ever known, that wouldn't be true. Especially for Spartans, as they are depicting here, of the 300 Spartans battling against the Persians, because Sparta was a leisure city-state. Or citizens of Sparta were a leisure class. So they were militarized, but they wouldn't be professional soldiers. It wouldn't be fighting, being a soldier 24/7, 365.
I would have liked to have gone fishing with my son. No.
All right. And here you can kind of see what the Persian Armada kind of looked like. Now this, okay, hold on. So this, what you see here, tiny, absolutely tiny to what it would have actually been. This entire bay right here would have been filled to the brim with Persian fleet ships. Now, of course, at the time, Xerxes had lost a lot of ships because of rain, because of the season that it was. Because it was the rainy season, there were a lot of storms that happened, lost a lot of ships. But
Spartans! Every breath that you have taken has led you to this moment.
good speech.
Every drop of blood, sweat, and tear, all of it has led to where you stand right now.
Fair enough. Still good.
Persians come to make slaves of us all.
Okay, here's another point that I want to make. Now, and this is hilarious, even coming from Sparta and Spartans themselves, is the fact that Persia, yes, they did have slaves, however, not to the extent that Sparta did. Sparta was very well known to have a Hellenic class, or a class of slaves, that was like 2-to-1 to Spartan citizens. So, when they say to make slaves of us all, that's very much a Western depiction of the East. So, let's continue.
I have a better idea. I say we drench the gods with their blood! What
Blood
say
sacrifice.
you, Spartans? For our sons! For our daughters!
Good inclusion.
Sparta!
I mean, he would have said for Greece, really. And here is where I also have issue. Okay, we're going to pause right here. Remember how I said that there would be a phalanx? Where's the phalanx? This is my biggest issue. Now, the great thing about the Greek soldiers, the Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, whomever, was that their shields were incredibly powerful. Their shields were made of wood and bronze, and that wood was almost always a solid piece of wood. So it would be one entire piece of wood, and it would be thick. And with the bronze and all of the holdings and the ropes on it, that shield itself, just the shield, would weigh around 20 pounds. So imagine just holding 20 pounds, just out in front of you, not down, straight up. And then having a 5-pound metal and wood spear being held at your head, like at head height, the entire time. So it is extremely heavy, and you had to be very strong. And as you can see from what as the Persians come in, there we go. This is a better depiction. They don't have shields. They don't even have metal armor. They have leather armor or even studded leather armor. And I just broke my pen, meaning that it was not very good. It could help against like slashes, but any sort of, penetrating force. So with a spear, arrow, sword, going straight into the leather, it would just demolish them. And this is what happened on that first day. As the soldiers come in, the Persian soldiers come in and fight, they would just be demolished. They would be just killed so easily. You can see just like, it's like butter. It's like a warm knife going through butter with these Zophii and hoplite spears. So it is extremely effective against the Persian armada. And keep in mind, this very first day isn't against the Immortals. It's just the accoutrement soldiers of the Persian Empire. So we're going to stop there for that and go back into this. So of that first day of battle, of true battle, only 3 soldiers died. 3 of the Greek force died. Now, of course, some say it's 3 Spartans. That's because they were at the front, while everyone else was behind them. Now, the interesting thing with this battle is that because they fought for so long, I mean, this battle lasted all day. But because there were so many Persian forces fighting against... Oh, let me get my music going, actually. Bring that back. Yeah, we're listening to Jack. Because there were so many units of Persia against, a finite amount of Greeks, they had to rotate each of their units. And each of the units were the Greek city-states. So Sparta was sitting at the front. They would feel the opening, and then once they started to get tired, they would switch in the Athenians, and then the Athenians would bring in the Corinthians, and then bring it back, and they would do that over and over again to kill as many of the Persians as they could. And when the fighting finally ended, only 3 Greeks had died, and around 2,000 of the 2,000 to 5,000 of the Persians had died that day. So, Day 2 is incredibly important in the Battle of Thermopylae. Xerxes sends the exact same amount of soldiers against the Greek armada, but seeing how well the Greeks destroyed and dismantled the first wave of Persian soldiers, he instead sends in the Immortals. The Immortals are the the Persian main force. These are the ones that were trained for years. If you wanted to talk about a professional soldier, the Immortals were them. And they were very skilled. Now, the reason for calling them the Immortals is because of how many forces there were. If one died, it looked like, you kill one, turn your head, turn back, and then the next, it looks like the Persian you just killed is right there in front of you, because once one died, another would just take his place. And so they looked like they were immortal. The most important thing with this second day of battle at the Battle of Thermopylae was that this was the day that Ephialtes, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, meets and tells Xerxes about the goat path that is behind the Greek force. Now, Ephialtes was a Greek who didn't like any of the other city-states. He saw Persia as the ultimate power, and he viewed that being ruled by the Persians would be much more beneficial, and he did it for a reward, because he thought that this amazing force could reward him handsomely and give him lots of money and wealth and power and land for doing this. Unfortunately for him, that didn't happen. But that's for a later time. So Ephialtes tells the Persians that were on the northwestern side of Thermopylae, he told them there is a goat path that you can take. It'll take 1 day to cross it with your forces, but it goes completely behind where the Greeks are, so we can surround them and you can win. Xerxes very much takes this up with him and uses one of his highest commanders to send 20,000 of his soldiers across the entire goat path. Now, with this, Xerxes, or not Xerxes, because of this betrayal, Ephialtes' name would become a stigma within the Greeks, or among the Greeks, and his name would later become associated with what nightmares are, which is one, a little tragic for his sake, but also fitting because of the fact that he had betrayed his fellow countrymen. But on the second day, again, the Spartans, the Athenians, the Corinthians all battled with the same ferocity, the same type, and again, only a couple of them perished in the fighting. So when it came to day 2, fighting was pretty much the same as day 1, except at this point, the forces of the Persians were starting to move behind the Greeks. Which, when we come to day 3, day 3 is our most pivotal day in the entire of Thermopylae. At this point, Xerxes is moving his forces up the goat path, which is being seen now by Greek scouts, as well as I keep on wanting to say Phoenicians, Phocians, I think is how you pronounce it. And the Phocians were a very small force, who were a sub-city state, who were supposed to hold the goat path that was behind the Greeks, or that led behind the Greeks. And they were just completely pushed away. Not even completely destroyed. Instead, what they did was the high commander under Xerxes moved his immortal forces through the goat path and just had his archers continue to fire volleys of arrows against the Phocians. Essentially just keeping them at bay, because if they moved, or if they, try to get closer, they would get hit by the arrows, which they can't have, because then they'll die. So instead, what happens is they just get pushed back, and the Immortals and the entirety of the Persian armada just continues to move, and completely starts to completely surround the Greeks. And at this point, the messengers from the Phocians and other helots run to the other Greek forces, run to Themistocles, to Leonidas, and tell them there is a huge amassing force that is trying to flank us at the goat path. The Phocians have fallen. What do we do? So, with Leonidas saying, or knowing that death is coming for them, because once the Persians get behind them, that's over. All of them will die or will be taken prisoner. So instead, he sends almost, He sends around 80% of the Greek force of the 7,000 away, leaving only around 1,000 soldiers left at the Hellgates, or Thermopylae. Because if they all died there would be no other forces for later. This is an extreme case of live to fight another day. Now, Leonidas knows that he is going to die with his other soldiers. He tells people, you can stay and fight, but if you run now, we can fight them later on when we gather more forces. And another ad is coming up here for Twitch, so let me snooze that one, actually. There we go. Okay. So, with the forces being moved away, and the Immortals beginning to descend on the Greeks, the Spartans, Thespians, and Thracians, who were left alongside the Helots, who helped with the gear, move from the Hellgates into open field right behind it. That way, the cavalry that Persia had pretty much had to go into a narrow pass so they could kill the soldiers more easily. But of course, with this, the Greeks were completely surrounded, so they would, over time, die more and more, or more and more would perish in battle. Leonidas himself would get hit by multiple arrows and die in the field of battle. And unfortunately, on that third day, he died very early on in the fighting itself, which this, of course, emboldened much of the Spartans, much of the other soldiers. Seeing this fearless, powerful king be killed made them enraged, and they fought even harder. And by the end of this fighting, all of the Greeks who were left, or nearly all of them, had died, while some were taken prisoner. And by the time of the fighting's end at Thermopylae, around, or just over 20,000 Persians had died. Of course, that's 20,000 of a force of around 200,000, so only about 10% of Xerxes' forces actually perished, but still, this was a heroic stand against an empire seeking expansion. And with some of the Greeks and Athenians, or with some of the Greeks being sent back to retreat, they were able to evacuate a lot of the city-states to other areas, so that way they wouldn't perish. But YouTube, I hope you've been enjoying this breakdown, this lesson on the Battle of Thermopylae. Again, as always, if there's something that I missed or something that I get wrong, by all means, do let me know down in the comments. If you enjoy this, do be sure to give a like to the video and subscribe if you're interested. As well, follow us over here at twitch.tv/mythologyandgaming. But yes, a lot. So of the soldiers being taken by the Persians, it was primarily the carriers of the equipment and the slaves, or the helots, that were taken by Persia to help them basically continue their job, but do it for the Persians instead. So with day 3 finished, all the fighting done, those dead left either buried or on the ground, Persia's forces could then move in and take over what was the Peloponnese. Or take over the Peloponnese. A story that Herodotus tells is that when Xerxes finally got to the battlefield where Leonidas had died, he saw the king and had him beheaded. Thankfully, it wasn't until I think it was about hundreds of years later that his body would be recovered, or his bones would be recovered and buried in Sparta. But with the Battle of Thermopylae finished, what happened afterwards? Well, as I'm sure some of you are aware, there were one or two soldiers who had left that last day of the Spartan force. This was especially with Aristodemus. Sorry, I always say his name wrong. Aristodemus was another soldier, another commander under Leonidas, who had an eye infection, and since he couldn't see, he couldn't fight. So he was sent away back to Sparta to, one, explain to the Lycomedon, the city, or to the city-state of Sparta, to tell them what had happened of their king and of the battle, but as well to recover and to heal. However, when he did do that, Spartan law dictated that you cannot run away from a battle, and so when he arrived back home, he was perceived as being a deserter and was very much disgraced. So as he walked the streets, to heal, he would be spat on, stoned, people would throw things at him, say terrible things to him, because that was the law. People were allowed to do that because it looked like he had left the battle of his own will. And a year later, at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, he would go on to fight. Now, when he did, Aristodemus, when he did go into fight in the battle there at Plataea, he would, and this is just makes his case even worse, he fought with such veracity that the other Spartans looked at him and went, "That is a true Spartan, a true hero." However, in doing so, in his fighting, he had broken rank and jumped ahead of everyone. So he had led the assault and moved ahead of his entire unit, basically destroying the phalanx that was being made, and disgraced himself by doing so. So not only was he considered honorable in his fighting by his comrades, but also he went on to break Spartan law, which then disgraced him even further. Very tragic, also kind of funny in a way, but with Thermopylae taken, Persia continued to move into the rest of the Peloponnese and into Athens, which thankfully had already been evacuated, so it was practically empty. So when Persia gets into Athens, they look at it and go, "We've conquered it. There's no one here. We've conquered empty buildings," which is a little bit of a letdown for them, but basically made sure that the Greeks could recover and defeat the Persians a year later at Plataea, to practically end the fighting. Excuse me. Now, if you remember from when we looked at the timeline for the Greco-Persian Wars, you'll see that it went to 449 BCE. So really what happened was between 479 and 449 BCE, the 30-year period, small skirmishes continued to happen between the Greeks and the Persians, until eventually the Persians were completely pushed out and the Greeks recovered all of their city-states and all of their land. So this leads to our last point with the Battle of Thermopylae, the story itself. So as we see the story today, a lot of times it's been depicted as how's the volume on this? As we see the story okay. So as we see the story today, we always view it as it's this heroic standoff between the 300 Spartans against hundreds of thousands of Persians, when in reality, yes, there were 300 Spartans on the last day of fighting, but overall in the fighting itself, there were thousands. There were at least 1,000 Spartans when the fighting had started officially. So to emphasize this story and make it profound and incredible, Diodorus wrote about it in his stories to exemplify how heroic the Spartans were at that time, how incredibly powerful King Leonidas was, saying that they were descendants from Heracles himself. Herodotus does this same sort of thing and continues to expand the story, use hyperbolic language to turn the story into a myth of itself, because history becomes legends and legends become myth, as some of you Lord of the Rings fans might have known. But why was it that the Spartans took over and basically took over the entire story? Well, that's because the Spartans were the ones telling the story. So of course they're going to use as much of their power as they can to show how powerful they were, because especially with the fact that Greece at that time was very much an oratory state. So they only told stories through word of mouth. And if you know anything about the concept of big fish, you tell a story, and the first time you tell it, it's going to be, pretty factual. You're going to hit all of the factual points, and then by the time you're telling the story, the 100th time that you're telling it, it's going to have a different points of it. It's going to have different features. It's going to have mythicized emphasis. So like with the movie 300, I keep going back to it because it is a mythicized story. You see the immortals being this demonic force, and that's how we kind of picture it now, which is very odd. Or like of the story itself, they were very much Eastern, they were otherworldly, and that's kind of how they wanted it, because that's how stories continue to show, or continue to form, continue to be told, by having this hyperbolic language. And with the poems being told of it, it continued this into what we see today. And that is our story for the Battle of Thermopylae and of the Greco-Persian Wars. So, YouTube, if you've enjoyed this, if you've enjoyed learning about the Battle of Thermopylae from someone like myself who is a history enthusiast, mythology fan, by all means, subscribe to the channel. Follow us over here at twitch.tv/mythologyandgaming. And I hope to see you in the next one. YouTube, again, thank you, love you, and I'll see you guys next time.